believe in a higher world beyond this material dimension that we currently exist in? Do you believe in such beings as spirits and angels, and that it's possible to communicate with such beings when you need help and guidance in your life? Do you believe in the power of mind and of the human spirit, and that this universe in which we live is far more magical and fantastic than we have been told? If so, you're not alone. And in this podcast, we will endeavor to talk about some of these subjects and focus on the growth of our greater selves. This is the infinite journey. Greetings and welcome, one and all, to the Infinite Journey podcast. I'm Paul James Caden, and on today's show, we are going to pick up on a subject that we spoke about probably 4 or 5 podcasts ago, about being indoctrinated. Given these mental programs by the world around us, and then our whole lives we just almost run on autopilot, reacting to certain people or situations in a certain way because that's how our parents did it, that's how our grandparents did it, that's how my friends did it. We all have this mental programming that is entrenched, that we don't even think about or question. It's almost like an alien DNA that takes over our brain and our emotions and our thinking capacity, and we just react. And maybe we don't even know why. Because we look at certain people and say they're the enemy, they're bad, they're good. We have all this criteria. We draw all these lines in the sand. This is A, this is B. And if you really research and look into some of these fears that many of us have, they turn out not to be true. Even though a lot of people in this day and age, it's very hard for them to face those mental programs, and they will take you to the wall for it, even if you show them proof that what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they believe is abnormal and false. But folks, we can't sit back and judge people and say, oh, they're bad, they're stupid, they're uneducated, because we have all been indoctrinated throughout our lives. Whether certain thoughts came from family members, mother, father, brother, grandparents, from school, friends, peer pressure, Hollywood, the news media, the government. There's really no end to the amount of people and opinions that are all fighting to take up residence in your thought process. Think of your mind and your subconscious mind as this unlimited warehouse, and everybody wants to store their product in that warehouse. And when you allow that to happen, well, sooner or later, you start acting and reflecting the attitudes and opinions and the fears and even the phobias and mental aberrations of that product. But how do we get rid of all of this debris? How do we get rid of all this stuff that makes us act and think and believe the way that we do? And it really starts with being honest with ourselves. And one way that we can be honest with ourselves is To think really, the words of King Solomon come to mind when he said, "There's nothing new under the sun." And I think that's something that all of us at the beginning of this journey need to realize, recognize, and accept as truth. Because let's face it, all of us can probably think back and have memories of our parents, our friends, our grandparents, whomever it might be, ranting and raving over the very things you're ranting and raving about right now. I remember when I was 4 or 5 years old, being at my grandmother's house. My brother and I were playing in the living room, and just off the living room was the kitchen. And my parents, my grandparents, one of my uncles, and two family friends were all in the kitchen. And voices were being raised, but they weren't raising their voices at one another. They were raising them because they were all in agreement with one another. And they were all talking about how all of the Democrats were crooks, bad people. They'll destroy the country. They're looking to destroy the country. They're looking to take our rights away. Same rhetoric we hear today. Now I'm 53, so this was probably back in, the mid latter 70s that this took place. But if we think back, if we look at history, these are the things that have always been said. And these things have been passed on to us. If we're prejudiced, there's a good chance our parents were prejudiced, or one of them were. And there's a good chance one of our grandparents, or both of them, were prejudiced, and their parents, and so on and so forth, and down the line it goes. There's nothing new under the sun. And all of this toxic mental programming that has been stuffed in the minds of people throughout the years is now exploding into all this chaos, division, and hatred. And the funny thing is, if you think about your parents, if you think about your grandparents, and as far back as you can remember, who were the people that hated the Democrats or the Republicans? Who were the people in your family or your neighborhood that hated people of color? And if you start asking yourself questions, why did they hate them? Why did they look upon them as being inferior? Were they ever wronged by a Democrat or a Republican? Well, most of us probably were in some way, because a politician is a politician, no matter what party they come from. But were they ever wronged by a person of color? 99.9% of the time, the answer is going to be no. Politicians are politicians, but life has always gone on. Someone who might be prejudiced, why did they hate them? Usually just because that's what they were told to do. If your father was prejudiced, well, why do you dislike people of color? Well, because when I was, young and I bought a house, uh, you know, uh, people of color bought a house in the same neighborhood, and that made the property value go down. Really? Really? It's usually something that inane, but most of the time, 99.99999% of the time, it's just because that's what they were programmed to think. And they think that way without question. My father thought that way, my grandfather, my great grandfather. We come from a long line of Republicans, Democrats, prejudiced people, whatever the case may be. And here we are today in 2020 with all of our computers and smartphones and tablets and apps, and we think we're so evolved and so smart and so much better than our ancestors were, but we're still running on all of those programs of great ignorance and false information. There is nothing new under the sun. We need to realize that, and we need to accept that, because then we can start the journey of getting all of those toxic programs out of our own consciousness. And how do we do that? Well, it's kind of a process very akin to what we just talked about. And to do this, you kind of have to be, as some Buddhist monks say, you have to be your own psychologist and you have to be honest with yourself. You have to monitor your thoughts, you have to monitor your feelings, your words, your attitude, the things that you do, the things that you say. And when you recognize those toxic programs coming out of yourself, even if it's after the fact, if you had interaction with a certain person and you just reacted with that hate and vitriol and, oh, you're so stupid because of whatever, the case may be, and you caught yourself doing that, or you caught yourself thinking it while you watched TV, thinking it while you read the news on the computer. But whenever these things pop up, you want to be able to find a space in your day where you can sit down, think about these things, and then ask yourself a question. Let's say you reacted negatively to someone who was supportive of a certain political party. You went off on that person. Maybe you even threatened them with violence. You were just, it got heated. And you were in one of these, modern day knockdown, drag out moments where you were ready to throw down with this person. And maybe you did. Maybe you did get in their face. That's a good time to sit down with yourself and say, when was the first time in my life that I felt this way, that I felt such hatred and vitriol toward a Democrat or a Republican or whomever? And go back and find that first memory. Maybe you were 20 years old. And then ask yourself, okay, why did I feel that way? What precipitated me feeling that way when I was 20 years old? Or 15, or no, however old you were. Then go over that a few times in your mind, and then ask yourself the question: is there an earlier memory in my life when I felt this way toward this particular person or group of people? And see if you can find an earlier memory. Go back as far as you can. When you can't find any memories of yourself, let's say maybe you go back to the age of 18 or 15 and you say, yeah, that's the earliest I can remember. I don't remember anything else in my life when I may have felt that way or reacted in that way or thought that way. Once you kind of reach the limit with your own personal memories, then ask yourself the question, Is there anyone in my family or anyone that I knew who thought that way, felt that way, believed that way, spoke that way? You may come up with several people, but go to the first one that comes to mind. Oh, maybe it was my father. Maybe I heard him talking to my uncle one day about, how bad certain political parties were, or, how bad or ignorant people of color were. And they were in agreement on that. Go over that a few times in your mind. Then ask yourself, is there anyone else I know? Is there any other incident in my life where I heard people speaking this way or believing this way? And you might, like me, go back when you were 4 or 5 years old. Oh, yeah, I remember this one day when I was at my cousin's house, and all the adults were having this conversation in the living room or the dining room. And they were talking about how this particular group of people, or people that believed or supported a certain thing, were dumb and ignorant and stupid and destroying the country or whatever it might be. And I was maybe, 4 or 5 years old. As you recall those memories, try to remember what the people said and always ask yourself, how did that make me feel? What was I feeling when I overheard these conversations? Whether someone said it directly to me or whether I overheard this conversation, how did it make me feel? Because maybe you felt like I felt when I heard my parents and my grandparents and everyone in the kitchen talking about how bad the Democrats were. I didn't even know what a Democrat was. I remember searching my little memory banks. What's a Democrat? I couldn't come up with anything. But I decided at that moment, at 4 or 5 years old, and I think I was 4 because I wasn't in school yet, and I started school at 5 years old. So at probably 4 years old, I made up my mind because these were the people I looked up to, especially my grandfather. Hey, whatever a Democrat is, uh, they must be bad. They're the bad guys. I didn't even know what a Democrat was. And that stuck with me for a while. I wasn't a political person in my life, but if someone asked me Republican or Democrat, oh, Republican, of course. Yeah, those Democrats, I didn't know anything about them. Zero, zip. So maybe you'll come up with something like that. But trace it back as far as you can. This may take, you may do this for a couple of days or a week, or you sit down just for maybe 10, 15 minutes a day or in the evening or before you go to bed and just ask yourself, okay, is there anything else I remember? Do I remember anyone else saying this? Do I remember anyone else that believed this way? Do I remember people talking to me about this, telling me that certain people were bad or I had to believe a certain thing? Go back as far as you can with it. And I guarantee you that when you do that, you're eventually going to come to a place where you are going to remember in your life where you didn't have those thoughts. They were absent from your mind. But little by little, as you were exposed to it, you took on other people's beliefs and thoughts. And then if you really dig into the why did my parents, my grandparents, the people around me, why did they hate certain people? Why were they against certain people? And I think we said this earlier. Were they wronged by a certain people in a certain political party or a person of color, chances are 99.999% the answer is no. It's just what they were taught. They have no personal reason, basis, or scientific basis, or historical basis for their hatred, their prejudice, their fear, whatever it is they have, except that that's what they were told was right. And they passed it on to you. And I guarantee you, when you start tracing this back in your own mind, you're going to see that quite clearly. And when you see that, when you realize that, don't be afraid to get rid of it. You're not disappointing granddad. You're not disappointing father or mother or whomever by getting rid of the toxic sludge that they put in your thinking process, in your consciousness. I guarantee you, if those people have passed on, they know they made a mistake. Because the pearly gates of heaven weren't opened up to them for hating the right people. Think about that. Think how convoluted and we talked about this in a show past, how convoluted our spirituality and our religion has become because it's filled with politics and prejudice and hatred and all of this toxic nonsense. When what supposedly gets us into the pearly gates of heaven, as I use that metaphor, it's love, it's kindness. We need to start straining all of that garbage out of ourselves. And nobody can do it for us. We may go to counseling, we may go to a psychiatrist, and they can help us maybe dig a little deeper if we need that kind of help to get, recognize where these things have come from. But it's our job to let it go. Nobody can make us get rid of that toxic programming. We have to be willing to dump it. So tracing these things back in our minds is a great way to get to the root of why we think and feel and believe the way that we do. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something with politics or society. These could be religious beliefs. If you find you're the kind of person running all over the place, pointing fingers, oh, you're going to hell and you're going to hell and I'm saved and you're not. And, this particular group of people, they're damned to hell because of how they voted or because of the color of their skin. All that junk is in our religion, as I said before. You might want to sit down and say, when was the first time I had those kind of religious or spiritual thoughts? Do I know someone who believed this way? How did that make me feel? It could be a family member, it could be a pastor or a priest that was very influential over us in our lives, instilled these things within us, and we swallowed it. Because, hey, this was the man of God, this was the pastor, this was the priest. I looked up to this person. He must be right. But those were just his or her thoughts. Again, be your own psychologist. When you see these things come up, if they are hateful, if they are divisive, if they are toxic, if they make you anxious, stressful, feel judgmental over other people, anything that has a negative charge to it, anger, judgment, fear, blame, anything of that nature, stop, put a bookmark in your mind or write it down, trace it back. Find out where that came from, because I guarantee it's not your thought. I'll tell you another great thing to do along with this, tracing our thoughts and our habits back in our minds, is what the great metaphysician Emmett Fox called the 7-day mental diet. And the 7-day mental diet, he said, take just 7 days and it will be the hardest thing you ever do. But he says, think of nothing but the attributes of God. When you find yourself being afraid, when you find yourself being negative or judgmental or worrying, anything of that nature, stop and think about the attributes of God. God is love. God is peace. God is harmonious. God is the healing presence. God is omnipresent. Right where I am, God is. Any positive thing you can come up with, joy. God is joy. God is just not love and joy, or God just doesn't feel those emotions. He is the spiritual embodiment of those positive things. So Emmett Fox tells us 7 days, and it will be the hardest thing you ever do. And it will also help you to see just how many times in a day your thinking is negative. You will probably stop yourself every 10 to 20 seconds and just start to contemplate on the attributes of God, the goodness of God, the beauty of the creation around you, things to be grateful for. Give thanks to God for your blessings. You'll find that you'll be doing that, like I said, every 10 seconds or sooner. And when you reach the end of that 7 days, you're going to realize that, wow, I really did have a lot of toxic sludge moving through my thought processes all the time. Look how many times I thought about this and this and this and this, just on that track in my mind, round and round and round. But if you can get through that 7 days, it will definitely change the way you think. You will feel better. You'll feel less burdened. You'll feel lighter mentally, psychologically, spiritually. You'll have a new understanding of yourself and the world around you, and where so many of these thoughts come from and bombard us every day. So again, tracing these things back in our mind, why we think and believe the way we do, doing the 7-day mental diet. 7 days of stopping immediately when we find ourselves thinking of anything negative or toxic or fearful or divisive or judgmental, anything negative at all, even if you're worrying about the rent or what kind of a jerk the boss is going to be today. Stop and contemplate the positive attributes of God. Give thanks for your blessings. Make yourself think of things that are positive and above and beyond the negativity of this world. Now, this takes some work, and we have to be dedicated. We definitely have to be dedicated, but we just can't snap our fingers and have our lives be changed. We can't take on this attitude, well, I believe in God or I believe in Jesus. He's going to make the change. Well, there's a lot of people out there saying that, and we haven't seen the changes happen yet. So you have to take some initiative. How else do we grow and mature as souls and as children of God? There's work to be done. Think of a little baby in a crib. You don't learn to walk for the baby. You don't just will the baby to start eating solid food and drink out of a cup. You just don't wish the baby to be potty trained and they do it. No, it takes training. It takes a guiding hand. It takes training. And that's what we need if we're going to make any kind of real changes in our lives. I want to leave you with this because there's a lot of toxic and negative thoughts mixed into our religion today, in our spirituality. People are really running on the toxic negative programs, and some say, hey, this is how God wants me to think. We go on the internet and look at all of the internet prophets and preachers who tell us to think this way and who to hate and what to believe, and it's the end of everything if we vote for so and so. God showed me in a dream. I don't put too much stock in those kinds of things. But when it comes to our own mental health and well-being, let's think of Philippians 4:8, which reads, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." Or how about Colossians 3, verses 1 through 2, which reads, "Since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things." Let me read that again, because I think this is so important for so many people out there right now. It says, "Since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God." And that last verse, I think, really drives it home. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. There's your 7-day mental diet. There's your getting out of this worldly mindset that again tells us what to fear, what to believe, who to hate, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. All these things society and the world tells us to worry about, be anxious about, stress about, hate, divide, judge, and even a lot of religious people telling us to do those things. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. And I especially like Psalm 19:14, which says, "May these words of my mouth and this meditation of my heart," that we have words and mind, our consciousness. That's what it's talking about when it talks about the heart in the Bible. "May these words of my mouth and this meditation of my heart, my mind, my spiritual consciousness be pleasing in your sight." That's something I think we really need to pause and think about when we speak, when we think, when we act. Most of us aren't doing that anymore. There is no filter. We just say and do and act any way that we want. But we need to start taking some responsibility. We need to start doing the mental and spiritual house cleaning within ourselves. We need to start training ourselves to stop setting our minds on the things of this earth and setting our minds on things above, higher ideals. Love, kindness, compassion, goodness. When those things become the predominant thoughts of our minds and the intentions of our hearts, that's when the world is going to change. So, all these are ideas that we can use to start cleaning the debris out of our subconscious mind, out of our reactive mind, getting rid of the old programming, getting rid of the old indoctrination, and stop being fooled by all of these old scare tactics that tell us if we don't think and believe and act or react in these certain ways, well, then somehow we're wrong. We're making the wrong decision. God is angry at us. Oh, we're going to hell. Oh, we're ignorant. We're stupid. We have to start getting rid of all of that. These are the concepts and teachings of men. Nothing new under the sun. And it's not always easy to unindoctrinate ourselves and get rid of those programs that are in our consciousness because they've been there so long. They've become a part of who we are, essentially. So it's not always easy, and sometimes it's a struggle, and sometimes it causes, a bit of anxiety because it feels like we're taking away a part of ourselves that we've relied on for so long. Maybe as a self-defense mechanism, maybe it's one of the stones in the foundation of our entire belief system. So it is not easy sometimes. You're going to reach those challenging moments where, man, this is hard and this is scary. But this is why I think something like the mental diet and contemplating higher ideals is very helpful because then you're taking out the old, but you're replacing it with something better. Something you know is right. Something that even in the midst of your fear and anxiety, it just feels right. It feels good. You know you've made the right decision by getting rid of that old programming. So know that there are going to be challenges. Know that it's not going to happen overnight. Some of the old programs go away very quickly as soon as you identify them. Others may take some revisiting a few times before you can get to the roots and get that thing out of there. But stick with it because you're going to feel 1,000% better. And if we all take the time to do this, it's going to have a major impact on our societies and on our world. It's going to make life on earth much more peaceful. Peace on earth, goodwill toward man that we hear at Christmas time, we can have that. But we have to have it within ourselves first. Then it will be reflected toward those around us. I thank you for listening, as always. I hope that you got something out of this show today. I'm signing off for now, but until next time, stay safe, stay well, treat one another with love and respect and dignity, kindness, and compassion. And be your own psychologist. When you find yourself thinking or feeling those old negative, hateful, divisive, whatever it is, sit down, trace it back. Put the cell phone down for a minute. Turn the TV off for a minute. Find 10 or 15 minutes in your day at least, and just start asking yourself, why? Why do I think that? Why do I feel that way? Start doing the work to make yourself a better person. Thank you again for listening. I'm Paul James Caden, and I will see you next time here on The Infinite Journey.